Cristiano Ronaldo is not chasing a finish line. He is running from an ending. At an age where football usually begins to turn its legends into memories, Ronaldo remains active, visible, and demanding relevance. He's still scoring goals, still training with an intensity that borders on obsession, and still speaking with certainty about where he believes he stands in football history. While the game gradually moves forward, Ronaldo pushes back against that movement, unwilling to allow his career to soften into nostalgia. He's already achieved everything a footballer can reasonably hope to achieve. League titles in multiple countries, Champions League trophies, individual awards, record-breaking goal totals, and a career that redefines longevity at the elite level. Yet, despite this, there's always been a sense that something remains unsolved. Not because his achievements are insufficient, but because the recognition he so dearly wants has never arrived in the form he imagined. For over 2 decades, football has existed within a simple comparison: Messi or Ronaldo, style or power, natural talent or constructed greatness. And over time, the consensus has shifted subtly but clearly towards Leo Messi. Not because Ronaldo has declined by any means, but because Messi's career has followed a narrative arc that has felt complete. International success, emotional resonance, and a sense of inevitability that gave Messi's story a conclusion. Ronaldo himself has felt that shift, and it has shaped the final phase of his career. That is why he continues to play professional football in the year 2026. That is why he speaks openly about reaching 1,000 career goals. That is why he consistently defends the Saudi Pro League, because his career has moved from completion to accumulation, from chasing trophies to securing numbers that cannot be debated. To understand why Ronaldo values this certainty so deeply, it's necessary to look beyond the footballing milestones and towards the foundations of his mentality. Ronaldo grew up in Madeira, far from the power centres of European football, in a working class family where financial stability was never guaranteed. Football was not a luxury. It was a route forward. At a young age, he left home to join Sporting's academy in Lisbon, a decision that required emotional independence long before most children develop it. From that point on, his life followed a path defined by separation, discipline, and self-reliance. That background not only shaped his ambition, but his relationship with validation. Ronaldo has spoken publicly about his father's death, and the fact that his father never saw him reach the summit of the sport. He never saw him win the Ballon d'Or. He never saw him celebrated as the best player in the world. He never stood in the stadiums that would later chant his name. For a player whose career has been built on proof and recognition, that absence left a permanent mark. When Ronaldo talks about being the best, it often sounds less like arrogance and more like urgency. His need is not simply to succeed. Being arguably great at football is not enough when the argument itself feels like a loss. The early version of Cristiano Ronaldo complicates many of the myths that later followed him. As a teenager at Sporting, he was not a physical specimen or a refined goal machine. He was expressive, excessive, and technically fearless. He played with an instinctive creativity that placed him among the most exciting young players in Europe. Contemporary reactions to his early performances reflected this. And this is best presented in this forum post I found from 2003 about an 18-year-old Cristiano, where this Barcelona fan describes how amazing it was to see this young Portuguese player live in 2003. God, I have never seen anything like him. I saw the match between Portugal and England in Toulon, and I couldn't believe in that kind of super skillful player. I saw a young Baggio. I saw a young Romario in Seoul 88. I saw a young Raul. I saw a young Zidane. But I have never seen a player so complete like Cristiano. The only player that it can be compared to in the last 20 years, except Maradona, was a young Ronaldo at PSV. It's only one game that I've seen him play, and there are players who look great in just one game. But Cristiano, this is impossible to make a mistake. His dribbles are the most creative and incredible in football history, pure poetry. He humiliates defenders, but he is complete. He crosses well, he shoots great, he passes well. And I want to say, I am going to be the first international fan who predicts this talented 18-year-old player a future in the glorious book of the best players of all time. I hope Cristiano goes to Barca for a long time because players like him have to be at the best clubs in the world. People who were lucky enough to see him that early on described him not as a project, but as a phenomenon at 18 years old. The idea that Ronaldo was never naturally gifted emerged later, largely in contrast to Lionel Messi. In reality, Ronaldo's gift was simply different. The turning point in his career did arrive later that year, during a pre-season friendly between Sporting and Manchester United in 2003. Ronaldo's performance that night was chaotic and relentless. He repeatedly beat experienced defenders, most notably John O'Shea, and played with a confidence that suggested he wasn't intimidated by the moment. After the match, the Manchester United players returned to the locker room and reportedly urged Sir Alex Ferguson to sign the young Portuguese player, with the team not returning to England until a young Cristiano Ronaldo had said yes. The transfer was completed within days. That match did not just introduce Ronaldo to English football, it marked the moment that he was chosen by the most dominant institution in the sport. At Manchester United, Ronaldo encountered structure, authority, and expectation. Sir Alex Ferguson became a central figure in his development, not only as a coach, but as a mentor. Ferguson allowed Ronaldo's confidence to grow whilst imposing discipline and accountability. Under his guidance, Ronaldo transitioned from a talented winger into a decisive, high-output player. And by 2008, when Ronaldo won the Ballon d'Or, his focus had shifted. Individual flair gave way to efficiency. Status replaced his spontaneity. United taught him that football history is not written by isolated moments, but by sustained dominance across seasons. And there was no better institution in football to teach him that than Manchester United. And that understanding defined his move to Real Madrid. Ronaldo arrived in Madrid with the intention of building something lasting. Early in his time there, he still played wide and relied heavily on his athleticism and dribbling. However, as physical demands increased and competition intensified, his game evolved. Around 2012, he began to prioritise positioning, timing, and finishing over individual expression, something he had built his brand around in the last 5 years. Jose Mourinho played a significant role in accelerating that transformation. Under Mourinho, Ronaldo was used closer to goal, fewer defensive responsibilities, and greater emphasis on direct impact. The result was a player designed for inevitability. Goals became routine. Performances became repeatable. Ronaldo's Madrid legacy is not just defined by the numbers, but by moments of release and moments of domination. La Decima represented a culmination of years of pressure. The subsequent Champions League three-peat turned Real Madrid into a modern dynasty, with Ronaldo at its centre. He became synonymous with the competition, consistently delivering in decisive moments, breaking records year after year, setting the tone in the Champions League. And throughout this period, Messi remained present. Their rivalry wasn't defined by hostility, but by contrast. Messi's greatness appeared effortless and intuitive. Ronaldo's appeared deliberate and constructed. Fans were drawn not just to players, but to philosophies. And over time, Messi's story reached closure. He achieved international success, he completed his narrative that he always wanted to, and ultimately has exited the debate early with a sense of resolution. But Ronaldo's hasn't ended in the same way. His move to Juventus marked the first phase where his individual excellence no longer guaranteed collective inevitability. Despite strong performances, the Champions League eluded him, the project underachieved relative to his expectations, and for most players at that stage of their career, acceptance should follow that. But for Ronaldo, it didn't. He then returned to Manchester United, and that was intended to restore balance to his career, but instead it exposed even more instability. The club at the time lacked a clear direction. The authority at the time was fragmented, and expectations all over the pitch were misaligned. The breakdown of those relationships played out publicly, and when things did become more public in his career, it culminated in a hell of a lot more interviews, and these interviews marked a shift in his public perception. His Piers Morgan one in particular. Ronaldo presented himself not as a player reflecting on a career, but as one defending his status. He declared himself the greatest of all time. He dismissed awards as political. He downplayed the importance of the World Cup shortly after Messi had won it, despite previously describing it as and ultimate ambition. And now his final World Cup, which looms on the horizon this summer, is not set as a last dance built on hope, but as a final checkpoint in a career that is measured increasingly by legacy management. But the player who once defined himself entirely through the game now exists in spaces far removed from the pitch. On the lead up to this summer's tournament, he's been photographed at the White House with Trump. He's dined with billionaires. He moves comfortably among presidents, heads of state, and some of the most powerful figures on the planet. Not as a retired icon looking back, but as an active symbol of global influence. To some, it feels surreal. To others, it feels unsettling. Ronaldo is no longer preparing for a World Cup. He's orbiting the country that is hosting it, sitting close to power, sharing tables with decision makers. And while nothing explicit is ever said, the optics of this invite interpretation. The contrast is impossible to ignore. Messi's last World Cup was framed as destiny, as narrative closure, as football rewarding purity. Ronaldo's final one feels political by proximity, almost transactional, as if he understands that stories are not only written on the pitch anymore, and that proximity fuels the suspicion, the memes, the jokes, the whispers that Messi's last World Cup was fixed, so maybe this year Ronaldo gets his. Not because anything is proven, but because the man himself has become larger than the sport's boundaries. And yet, despite all of this, the wealth, the influence, the access, the rooms he now walks into, the contradiction remains striking. Cristiano Ronaldo has become more than just a footballer. He's a global brand. He's a billionaire. He's a figure who sits comfortably alongside the most powerful people on earth. His life now extends far beyond goals, trophies, or tournaments. And still, none of that seems to satisfy him. None of that seems to quiet the obsession, because when everything else has been achieved, money, fame, power, influence, the only thing he truly seems to care about is the one metric that moves forward. The number, the tally, the chase. 1,000 goals scored. As if, at the end of all of this, football might be the smallest part of that world he now lives in. Yet, it's the only part that still matters. As his career reaches its final phase, his insistence on greatness becomes more pronounced. When Vinicius failed to win the Ballon d'Or, Ronaldo labelled the award as rigged. Every interview he's had in the last few years reinforces the very same message, that to Cristiano, validation matters most. And public reaction has shifted accordingly to that. What was once viewed as sporting confidence quickly become memes of an overinflated ego. Comparisons to fictional characters like Homelander captured the sense that confidence had become self-parody. What once felt like an unshakable belief, the yearning to win everything, began to resemble insecurity. And that is the paradox of Ronaldo's entire career. The closer he moves to 1,000 career goals, believing it will confirm his status as the greatest footballer of all time, the further he appears to move from the validation he seeks. The pursuit of that numerical certainty, not as legacy building, but as self-affirmation. And at the same time, his longevity remains extraordinary. Playing professional football into his 40s, maintaining this elite level of fitness, and continuing to score at this level defies conventional career limits. His decision to continue until the end of his contract in the 26-27 season places him on track to reach the milestone he set for himself. Ronaldo's ego was never a flaw. It was the engine. It was the force that pushed him to train harder than everyone else, to refuse to rest, to turn criticism into fuel, and to demand more from himself long after others had settled. His belief that he needed to be the best, not admired or respected, but to be validated as number one, shaped every major decision he made. Without that ego, Cristiano Ronaldo does not become Cristiano Ronaldo. He does not dominate England, redefine himself in Spain, or sustain elite performance into his late 30s. But ego evolves. What begins as hunger eventually could become defense. What once drove growth begins to resist acceptance. As Ronaldo's career moves closer to its end, his search for validation intensifies rather than softens. Instead of allowing football to speak retrospectively, he began to speak it for himself. Interviews have become more declarative. Awards have become political. Context is dismissed whenever he doesn't think it serves him. And that is where the paradox takes hold of his career, because the ego that elevated him into these GOAT conversations is the same ego that now pushes him further from consensus. The more he insists on his greatness, the less organic the greatness feels to the audience. Football fans will argue forever about who the best is, but they recoil when a player appears to demand agreement. Validation in football is something that has to be given, not claimed. And Ronaldo's tragedy is not that he has an ego. Every great player does. It's that his search for validation has never ended. It's simply shifted form. When trophies were no longer enough, it became records. When records were no longer enough, it's become longevity. And now, as consensus drifts elsewhere, it has become arrhythmic. 1,000 goals will be his final proof. The same ego that made him one of the greatest has begun to reshape how he is being remembered. And that is the cost of never accepting second place. There are two ways to interpret this ending. A legend clinging to numbers as emotional consensus moves elsewhere, and another view is a refusal to accept decline. An athlete redefining the boundaries of possibility, and both interpretations of this can coexist. Cristiano is not losing the legacy he once had. He's just reshaping the end of it. He may never receive a unanimous agreement on being the greatest footballer of all time, but by reaching 1,000 goals, he ensures that his career will be recorded in a way that resists erasure. Messi's legacy might feel like a story that football tells itself, and Ronaldo's might feel like a monument that he's constructed himself through resistance. But monuments, whilst colossal, cast shadows. The paradox Cristiano finds himself in is the closer he comes to confirming his own belief of his greatness, the further he may drift from the validation he desires. Yet by refusing to stop, by extending his career beyond conventional limits, he guarantees that football will never be able to ignore him. And perhaps, for Cristiano Ronaldo, that was always the point.